Morning, Council. We are live.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to do a roll call, please.
Councillor Shortreed.
Present.
Councillor Tyson.
Present.
Councillor Berry.
Present.
Mayor Danielson.
Present.
Mayor Moffat.
Present. Thank you. Item 3 is the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Algonquin Highlands is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which are Curve Lake, Rama, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We acknowledge a historical shared presence of indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Councillor Shortreed, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved that the January 20th, 2022 council meeting agenda be approved as circulated.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, I have no remarks today. May I have a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the previous minutes? Councillor Berry, Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Berry, seconded by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that the December 9th regular council and December 20th, 2021 special meeting minutes of council be approved as circulated.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. There are no public meetings today, but we do have a delegation. It's Mr. Harold Elston, who's the Integrity Commissioner, and he's going to bring us our report. So we'll just bring him in. Good morning, Mr. Elston.
Good morning, Your Worship, members of council.
Thank you for joining us today. You've got a couple of presentations for us, which are the second of which is the report, which is required under our agreement with you. So please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm not sure how much time you've allocated for this. I have a PowerPoint presentation and I can move through it relatively quickly. But I think I find the most effective way to do this is if you stop me and ask me questions as I'm working through it. And then my annual report doesn't take very long for me to speak to. So I don't know, Madam Clerk, shall I be watching the time or will you let me know?
Our procedural bylaw allows for 15 minutes. However, the mayor can extend the time if required.
I would say that the, Don, your audio is a little crackly. So if I can just step in, the procedural bylaw allows for 15 minutes at the discretion of the chair, of course. And I think the information that you want to share with us just about the structure and principles is important. So I think it's fair enough to go through that and just share the good news about how we do our jobs.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. So I have on my other screen here the PowerPoint, and I think you folks have it maybe in a hard copy or on your screen. So it'll look a bit odd because I'm going to look over here, but I'm just looking at that screen. So, but I've done this a few times, so I think I remember a lot of it. So the first thing is I'm off by a year. You'll see I've dated it January 20, 2021. So anyways, my apologies. And I can correct that if just for your copies, I can send along an updated one just because a year from now, I don't want to be confused. So I talk about the I call it the structure and principles of effective municipal government. And, there's a lot of law, a lot of statutes, bylaws, best practices, rules, regulations, but I try and sort of boil it down, to a little bit of an essence here, so that, you're kind of more comfortable doing what you do and understand the parameters, as opposed to it just being kind of a bit of a fog. So I've got it down to 6 topics here that I'll speak on, a bit of an overview. I touch on roles and responsibilities, mostly just taken from the Municipal Act, so you're probably all familiar with those. A little section on municipal accountability officers, which are integrity commissioners, auditors, ombudsmen, closed meeting investigators. They're sort of a collection of folks that do this sort of accountability work. Bit of a talk about the codes of conduct, and then Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, which I find that's where I get most requests for advice, people wondering about conflicts, and it's something that I've tried to break down so it makes a bit more sense and a little easier for you folks to know when you need to call me, I guess. So, and then finally, just a bit on social media. It's becoming such an issue everywhere and with counselors, and so I have a few thoughts on that. In the overview, I just say that you're it's a rules-based system. You are a creature of statute, as they say. So all your powers and rights and obligations, responsibilities have to flow from a provincial statute. So there's kind of 4 main ones. The Municipal Act governs the powers of the municipality, sets out the roles of council. It's the main, sort of guide for you folks. There's the Municipal Elections Act, which you only have to deal with every 4 years, but it's going to be something you'll want to think about. It's mostly for Madam Clerk to deal with and set up the election, but there are obligations on councillors, mostly the financial reporting obligations, which can get a little dense. So I don't really talk about it, but it's an act that has a big, every 4 years sort of looms large. The Conflict of Interest Act, which I'll talk about at length, and then the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which I don't really have any slides on it. I think the main message there is that the starting point is that the public has a right to access all municipal records. So anything that's under the care and control of the municipality, and it's usually your clerk is appointed as the head. I'm not sure if that's the way you've done it in Algonquin Highlands. And so it's up to the clerk. The requests are made. And as I say, the starting point is public gets everything, but then there is a series of 8 or 9 exceptions. So instances where you don't have to disclose. And some of them are easy to understand, solicitor client advice, things that are given in a confidential way, technical knowledge, trademark things, those kind of scientific knowledge. And then others that it's a bit more of a gray area, personal information and things. But I think as a member of council, it's always good to know that for the most part, your emails, for example, are subject to FOI requests. So even though you think you're communicating just with staff or another counselor, those requests, or those emails are FOIable. The public can ask to see them. So just good to keep that in mind when you're communicating. The second bullet point, I've tried to boil all of this down to sort of a bit of a complex sentence here, but I say councils are to govern as a whole in a transparent and accountable way, free from conflicts and bias, in a respectful and honest manner. So that's kind of the mission. That's just trying to sum up all the rules brought into one sentence. The next point, something that's very important to remember, there is a real division, a distinction between the role, responsibilities of members of council and members of staff. And as long as it's clear what everybody's role is, things seem to function quite smoothly. And there's a bit of a reasoning, there's a good sort of philosophy behind who does what, and I'll get into that in a bit more. But it's also critical when I see municipalities struggling or becoming a bit dysfunctional, it's those roles get mixed up. And I'll talk a bit about that later. Finally, I say all of it comes down to maintaining the public trust. So think of yourselves as trustees of the residents of Algonquin Highlands. Everybody is busy with their jobs, their families, their charity work, their leisure work. And what they've done is assign the responsibility for setting the rules and managing the community on their behalf. They've given you folks that power, that authority. So everything that we talk about, whether it's conflicts or relations with staff or just conduct during a council meeting, all goes to maintaining that public trust. Because at the end of the day, the folks, maybe they're sitting in the council chamber, maybe they're watching from home today, they have to think that, those 5-6 people that are making the decisions, I trust them. They're doing it in the public interest, not their own private interest, not because they have a feud going on with somebody. They're always looking out for my interests, and I can focus on what I do. So I'll just start with some of the roles. I'm sure the role of council. This is taken right from the Municipal Act. I may have paraphrased a bit of it, but I think the important thing here is this is the role of council as a whole. It's not individually. This is what you folks as a group, what your role is. Represent the public, develop policies and programs. So it's your job to decide what are the priorities for the community, what are our goals, what are our objectives, what should our policy be, whether it's on roads or planning policies, those kind of high level things. And you determine which services. Are we going to plow all the roads? Is the library going to be open 7 days a week? Are we going to have full-time firefighters? Those kind of services. And then you have to make sure that there are appropriate policies and practices in place so that your staff can implement your policy choices. You have to make sure everything's done transparently in an accountable fashion, and they have saddled you with responsibility for the financial integrity of the municipality. So you do have kind of an oversight. In certain circumstances, you can be held accountable on financial matters. So that's council, that's you folks as a whole. The head of council, they break it down into 2 sections. So there's the role of the head of council. And the first thing they say is the head of council is the chief executive officer of the municipality. So there's sort of a two sort of groups or collections of roles. So your worship, as you know, you preside over meetings, make sure they're carried out effectively and efficiently. So there is a power that the mayor has to say, well, we've had enough on that, let's move on, or that's not relevant, we don't need to hear that, move along, please. Providing leadership, which is what you would expect from the head of council. Representing the municipality at official functions, of course. And also the fifth one, which is something that I've found increasingly helpful working with my mayors, is providing information recommendation to council with respect to accountability, transparency, administrative things. So increasingly I'm being contacted by CAOs, clerks, and the mayor to say, you know, we're wondering about this. And so I prepare a letter of advice and to the mayor, and the mayor can present it to council. So it's a good way of having a discussion about maybe a problem, sort of an issue that keeps coming up in a particular municipality. And I think the act makes it clear that that's perfectly acceptable to come through the mayor. Chief Executive Officer role is just promoting the municipality. So they break it down into about 4 different ways, but you know, basically you're the face of the municipality and the chief spokesperson. Then they talk about locally, nationally, and internationally. So it's recognized somebody needs to be the face of the municipality and take a leadership on that. So your chief administrative officer is the sort of general manager of the municipality. So there is an expression that the CAO is council's only employee, which I don't think it's certainly not in any of the cases, or it's not in the Municipal Act, but it you hear that said, and it may be in a ministry guideline somewhere. And it's consistent with an approach that council can give instructions and directions to the CAO or the head of your team on different things, and then it becomes that person's responsibility to talk to department heads and see how things are, you know, being done and what can be done. So very important role. I see CAOs coming from all walks of life, sometimes years and years in the municipal context, and some from a provincial role, and other times just from business. So it's an important role, and most places the CAO and council work very closely, and so important role. The clerk, this is right from the Act. This is just the standard, the ones we all think about, to record things, to keep copies of bylaws, etc. But I think we all know, and I know, Madam Clerk, what she does for your municipality. It's a much bigger role in most places than just keeping a record and keep track of things. It's sort of I think of the clerk as the chief logistician in any municipality, someone who knows how things need to go, because it's a very procedural heavy environment that you operate in. So the clerk is the one who knows how you need to be approaching things. Staff, you know, if council is the one who sets policies, sort of sets the ship's course, it's staff who implement those things. And so this is where everybody needs to sort of stay in their own lanes, for lack of a better way of putting it. But you folks come up with the big picture ideas, the overall policy approach, the strategy, and then you hand it off. And it'll be up to your staff to implement that as they see fit. So an important distinction there. The second thing they do, of course, is research and give you advice. And this is really important, because you know, you folks, you're not all trained as lawyers, accountants, engineers, planners, administrators. So you need to get the best expert advice that you can, and that's what your staff is there for. And they need to feel they can come to you and tell you things, maybe not exactly what you want to hear every time, but you know, they talk about without fear or favor. They need to know that they're secure, that their views will be respected, and that they won't be in any way punished or suffer any kind of retribution if they come and say, I know you really want to do this, but we can't. There's a provincial policy that says we can't, or our official plan says we can't, or the police say we can't. They need to be able to come and give you that kind of advice without concern. So that's why the relationship is important, because you're only as good, your decisions are only as good as the advice that comes to you that you base your decisions on. So you've got to get really objective, clear advice. Then we get to the role of the counselor, which is not defined in the Municipal Act. And I have to think that's on purpose, so that as an individual counselor, you really have no assigned roles. You only have powers. You can only exercise your authority as a group. And it's a little bit of a difficult, well, it's not a difficult concept, but I just know people get elected because they want to accomplish things. And you go into it individually, you don't pick your team members, you end up with a team, but that's the team you've got, and that's a team that you have to do everything with. So the Ontario Municipal Councillor's Guide talks about you having the role of representative, of course, a policymaker, but as a group, and a steward, but again, as part of a group. So that you're public officials, but you have no management powers. And in some places, that's where the line gets blurred. And so you just have to bear in mind that you're on council, even if you're trained as a lawyer, or even if you used to run a public works department somewhere, that's not your job anymore. And you have to understand that you're there as a counselor to operate with a group, or as part of a group. Just briefly, the list of accountability officers. This has been a growing list, increasingly, I'll say, important, or increasingly a big part of municipal governance. Integrity commissioners, lobbyist registrars, closed meeting investigators. You can actually have your own ombudsman, ombudsperson, and auditor general. So you see, for example, the city of Toronto has all of these people, and they all have staff and big offices. Like big offices in the sense that they have a lot of staff that work with them. So in more rural municipalities, you know, it's not as I'll say, kind of fully formed a function, but you have the ability to have all of those things. Codes of conduct, you're familiar with your code. You've got a good code. It covers all the bases. Just to sort of go back, because it always helps me to understand why there are codes of conduct, why I do what I do. Back in, well, it would have been the late 1990s, I think, maybe into the 2000s, the city of Toronto decided they needed to get new computers for everybody. So you can imagine millions and millions of dollars involved in that purchase. And it became very, I'll say, corrupt, but it was not working, you know, properly, fairly. There were anecdotes about professional hockey players delivering bags of money to members of council in the underground parking garage. Like, it was really bad. So the province said, you know, we need to have a public inquiry. This is way out of hand in Toronto. So Madam Justice Bellamy was then a sitting judge, and she was appointed to conduct a public inquiry in the city of Toronto over the computer leasing scandal. And it's become sort of the seminal work on municipal codes of conduct and integrity. So it went on for months and months, maybe a year, and she came out with a series of recommendations. And so for our purposes today, one of the recommendations was the city of Toronto had to have a code of conduct, and the city of Toronto had to have an integrity commissioner. So that's the start of it all. And it was just the city. She said other people could, and the act was amended so that other people could have an integrity commissioner, but you didn't have to until about going on 3 years ago, 2019 in March. The province said, okay, from now on, everybody has to have a code of conduct. Everybody has to have an integrity commissioner. So it's really taken off since then. There is a regulation on codes of conduct, but it's pretty skinny. And as integrity commissioners, we were hoping that there would be sort of a model code of conduct, so that across the province, the same rules for gifts, the same rules for conduct, the same rules for confidential information, but they didn't. They just said codes of conduct have to have rules about gifts, benefits, hospitality, respectful conduct, including conduct towards officers and employees of the municipality, confidential information, and use of the property of the municipality. So that's the only guidance in terms of the content of codes. Now the codes take those four things, build on them, break them down into different parts, but essentially that's sort of what it is. Plus now commissioners are responsible for the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So that was new as of going on almost 3 years ago. It used to be that was, you had to go to a judge. You couldn't go to an integrity commissioner over conflicts of interest. And I'll get into why I think that happened. But so there's always two things that I'm looking at: the code and the Conflict Act. Just a little bit on penalties. The Municipal Act says the Integrity Commissioner does an inquiry, an investigation, and if he or she finds there's been a breach of the code, you make a recommendation to council. Council decides. So I don't have any power to discipline anybody, but I make a recommendation. And strictly speaking, under the Act, there's just two things I can recommend to you. Either you reprimand the member who's I've found has contravened the code of conduct, or you can suspend their pay for up to 90 days. And that's kind of it. But the courts have looked at this, and there seems to be some, pretty good law that as long as you're not making something an offense, as long as you're not fining someone, as long as you're not sort of imposing a penalty, there are a number of things you can do, some of which the mayor already has power to do. You can remove someone from a committee, you can take someone's chairmanship or away on a committee, you can ask for an apology, a number of different things that can now be imposed as sanctions. As for the Integrity Commissioner, first thing to remember is Integrity Commissioners are independent. So we're not staff, we're not agents, we're not consultants. We are independent, appointed under the Municipal Act. So the closest is, say, your chief building official, someone who is at, a distance beyond arm's reach of council. The next thing that I keep in mind is that it's basically confidential. The Municipal Act says that I am to preserve secrecy in about all the information that comes to my attention. And that, just by way of background, I started as a criminal defense lawyer, and that just kind of goes against, everything I was taught and learned as a criminal lawyer. This sort of secrecy on behalf of the judge, the prosecutor, the complainant. But over the years, I've come to see why it's important. It's a bit like the whistleblower legislation, so that you want people to come forward without fear that there'll be any kind of reprisals or repercussions against them, with some exceptions. But generally, I keep as much as I can confidential. The other thing that surprises people, probably not so much anymore, but at first, that my report is in open session. So, you're all used to Section 239 of the Municipal Act that says meetings are open, except, and then that long list of exceptions when you can go into closed session. And of course, one of them is a personal, not personnel, but a personal matters about an identifiable individual. And I can't think of anything that's more personal about somebody than one of my reports. But they are to be delivered in open session. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because the idea is the residents need to know that there are rules, that there's someone who is enforcing the rules, and that if someone is, accused of breaking the rules and is found to have broken the rules, that there will be a public, session on that, and it'll be public knowledge. And so it's just sort of a difficult part of the what I do. I find it very difficult reporting in open council. There's always counselors who, all counselors have a following, people who support them, and sometimes one of their favorites has done something wrong, and I'm kind of the guy in the black hat. And the worst for me is when I'm at the end of the agenda, and I'm sitting back in the day when we met in person, and I'm sitting in the council chamber about to deliver a report that everybody's read, sort of condemning somebody's actions, and there's a room full of people who aren't very happy about that. But anyways, that's one of the sort of peculiarities of my job. So I apply the code, other ethical rules. So for example, in your procedural bylaw, you'll have points of order, questions and things like that. So if something comes up of an ethical nature, a breach of some parts of the procedural bylaw, I can look at it. I give people advice, counselors advice, staff advice, which I think is the most rewarding part of what I do. I think it's where I bring a great deal of value to the municipality by being able to give advice. So I think it's well worth an hour of my time if someone comes to me and says, do I have a conflict of interest? As opposed to trying to sort it out on your own, maybe making the wrong call, voting on something you shouldn't have, somebody makes a complaint, and then it gets really expensive and takes up a lot of time. So, and I'm finding once people, sort of get, I'll say, comfortable with me, it's easier and easier to call me, and I try and get back right away. Often, Harold, I've got a council meeting, tomorrow morning at 9, and I'm worried about this. So I try. I'm not perfect, and I know I've been taking a while to get back to some of you on some things, but that's the goal. And at the end, I have broad powers. So the act gives me the power to initiate a public inquiry, and it gives me all the powers of a commissioner under the Public Inquiries Act, which is to be able to send summonses to people, hold a public hearing, summons documents, everybody's files. I have access to all the municipalities' records and information. So, but I don't think I've ever heard, I've never done it, and I've never heard of an integrity commissioner who has actually invoked the full-on powers under the Public Inquiries Act. There are times I've thought to myself, we need a public inquiry here. This is getting out of control, but doesn't happen very often, but those powers are there. Just a bit of advice. Your request for advice has to be in writing, and my response has to be in writing. And I think that's just so there's a record. Nobody gets confused about what I was asked or what I said. But I do encourage people to call me first. I think it's quite appropriate for someone to call and say, I'm worried about this. Maybe I have a conflict, but is it a function of what I own or my husband owns or my wife owns? And talk about it first. And because I think crafting the question, what is the advice you need is half the battle, getting that question right. And then I know what I'm answering. I know what you need, which, sometimes is a bit different than what you think the problem is. So good to call me first, talk it through, and then I give it in writing. The other kind of an interesting thing here, the fourth point I make is I'm used to the solicitor-client relationship. So nobody can make me disclose anything you've told me when we have a solicitor-client privileged relationship. It's the highest level. It's the most protected information and relationship known to law. So I'm kind of used to that. So I'm used to keeping things confidential, but it's not quite the same. So the act actually makes this very clear. So just to try and give you an example, if somebody writes me and asks for advice, Harold, do I have a conflict of interest in this situation? And I write a 5-page letter back, and partway through the letter, I say, it's really arguable that you don't have a conflict of interest. But at the end, I say, but all things considered, you have a conflict, you shouldn't vote. So someone gets that letter and, they vote anyways. And a member of the public says, hey, that's wrong. You have a conflict. What are you doing? And they say, well, I have a letter. Here's a letter from Harold saying it's arguable I don't have a conflict. So if someone brings that to my attention, or if I'm reading the local news, I think, well, wait a sec, that's not what I said. So then, you've kind of waived that privilege or the confidential nature of our correspondence. And I can say, well, wait a sec, here's the full opinion. Here's really what I said. So just to avoid anything, and that's never happened, but I think that's why it's there. And then finally, I talked about keeping it confidential, but there are times when I am allowed to disclose information. So if I call a public meeting under the section 223(4)(1)(h), I can disclose things. If I'm making an application to a judge, when we get to the conflict of interest, you'll see that I have the ability on my own to go to see a judge, or in my written reasons. Because when I do, and I don't think I've had any complaints, so you folks haven't, had the pleasure or the burden of reading what I put together in my reasons, but it's important that everybody understands how I got to my conclusion. It's important they understand what the rules are. It's important that they understand the facts, but there needs to be an analysis that people can read and say, okay, I get it. I see why that particular counselor breached the code of conduct. And sometimes to do that, I have to reveal confidential information. So it's always there. I always warn anybody if I am dealing with a complaint and I get information, I try and say, I keep it confidential, but if I have to disclose this for what I'm finding to make sense, I'm allowed. More on confidentiality. I guess I've touched on most of this, just a couple of, sort of minutiae here. So my duty of confidentiality prevails over the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So if I'm interviewing somebody and I'm taking notes and I stick it in my file and somebody makes an FOI request to say, I want to see Commissioner Elston's notes on his interview with, somebody. The act says, no, you're not allowed to see those. So that's good. And I'm not a competent or a compellable witness in a civil proceeding. Again, this has never happened, but I think the idea is, somebody complains to me, makes a complaint, I do my investigation, I find that there was a breach of the code, and I make my report and say, I think the councillor such and such broke the code. And then the person who made the complaint sues the councillor. And so it becomes a civil matter. It's in the courts. And maybe they want me on the witness stand to say what I know. And so in the same way that your husband or wife can't be a compellable, competent witness, neither can I. So in that sense, you can tell me things and I can't be hauled into court at some point, down the road to spill the beans, so to speak. Well, the last one there is just if I think that the law has been broken, and sadly this happens from time to time. I'm in the middle of an investigation and I think, oh my God, I think this is a criminal matter. I have an obligation to put my pen down and call the OPP. I'm out of it, and then the criminal prosecution runs its course, and then I can pick things up again and carry on. But they don't want me being out there investigating crimes. So that's a real clear line in the sand there. There are sort of 6 main kind of complaints I get. So first, pecuniary interest or conflict of interest, both pecuniary and personal. And I think everybody has just sort of now tuned in to the rules on conflict of interest. And I think back, in the olden days, everybody knew that that councillor owned that gas station and that shopping center, or had a son that was a real estate developer or something. And it was just, we know why that got rezoned, kind of thing. So now that doesn't happen. And I think everybody is pretty quick. And I think some people watch council and councillors, some in particular, looking for a conflict. And so that's a big part of my job, is to, sort of break it down. And we'll get into it if I haven't, run out of time, or I have more sort of detailed comments on code of conduct. Discreditable conduct, just as you can imagine, councillors complaining against other councillors, the public complaining against the councillor, either just disrespectful behavior or, harassment kind of stuff. A lot of complaints from municipal employees, and it gets into that crossover where a councillor just kind of exceeds their role, is out on the work site with a helmet on, dig here, dig there. It's very damaging to the workings of government, but also to morale at staff. They were hired because they know where to dig, or they know what section of the act to tell you about, and they should be left to do that. improper use of influence, which is a kind of conflict of interest thing. You have to be careful if you're on a counselor that you don't use that position for reasons other than, you know, official business, the public interest, municipal objectives. And then disclosure of confidential information. People are really hung up on this. I'll say I think we're a little bit precious about the protection of confidential information. Super important, absolutely, but sometimes, you know, something will come out that doesn't really do any harm. It's not sort of damaging. Yeah, you probably shouldn't have said that, and I look at it that way because at the other end of the spectrum, it's a criminal offense. So I think it's section 122 of the Criminal Code of Canada. It's breach of trust by a public official. So at a certain point, you start talking loosely about things that were happened in closed session or just anything you learned of a confidential nature, and it becomes a crime. But it's a very high standard, and it's you know, you can imagine it's the kind of thing where in closed session there's talk about, you know, buying or selling some land, and somebody goes off and tells that information to someone else, and they start a numbered company and they buy the land, and you know, where there's clearly a use of that for a very improper purpose. So that's when it's a crime. That's when certainly I get, you know, interested. So code of conduct inquiry, it's not spelled out anywhere. A lot of codes have a protocol now, very good protocols. Basically, the complaint has to come to me. It has to be in writing. It has to be signed. Sometimes it has to be sworn. Has to say what happened, what sections of the code were breached. So I get that, and the first thing I do is I just look at it and say, first of all, is this something under my jurisdiction? And if it is, and if I think it's not a frivolous, vexatious kind of complaint, then I send it to the respondent counselor. So I write a letter, I say, I've received a complaint, here's what it's all about. Can you give me your side of the story in 2 weeks or so? But I never pressure people. If you need a bit longer, I'm happy to give you more time. I get that. I send it to the complainant and say, well, you know, here's what she's saying. And if it doesn't sort of settle out there, then I go on to the next stage where I start interviewing people. And sometimes there are a lot of people in the room when it happened, and I'm interviewing a lot of people. Sometimes I don't need to interview anybody, especially code of conduct things, because it's a function of, did you have a pecuniary interest? Did you vote? And I don't have to interview a lot of people on that. Then I write the report, and I find this is the hardest. It's the most time consuming. Whenever I'm late, whenever I am, you know, overdue with a report, it's just because I'm struggling to get it right. And I try and make them relatively pithy. I try to keep it under 10 pages. Nobody needs to read War and Peace on any of this stuff. But, you know, they say it's harder to write a short letter than it is to write a long letter. So it takes me anyway some time. It's the hardest sort of part, bearing in mind things have to be confidential. I've got to tell the whole story. I got to get the facts right, because I'm the prosecutor, I'm the defense attorney, I'm the judge. So I'm doing several different roles. And then I report to counsel in open session, making recommendations. So just a few on the Conflict of Interest Act, and we'll be there. So just let me know, Your Worship, if I'm running out of time or I need to speed anything up. But
I think you could probably move a little more quick pace.
Okay.
I mean, it's all excellent information that we need to be reminded of and the public needs to be aware of.
Okay,
And we also do have a full agenda. So,
yes, I'm sorry, okay.
but I don't want that to sound like I'm dismissing the importance of the information that you're sharing.
No, I don't take it that way, but I do know you've got a long day. So Conflict of Interest Act, you all know Section 5, if you have a pecuniary interest, which is just financial, just money, it's not defined, but it's about money, then you can't, you have to disclose that interest and the nature of it. You've got to fill out the form. You can't participate in the discussion. You can't vote. And you can't try and influence the vote. And if you do any of those things, you're in breach of the act. And it's in law, we call sort of an absolute liability offense. If you have a pecuniary interest and you vote, it doesn't matter why, like you are sort of guilty as charged on that. I just finished one in kind of a neighboring municipality where, for all the right reasons, the member of council stepped into a discussion where he or she had a pecuniary interest, had in fact disclosed the interest, filled out the form, wasn't going to vote, but jumped in to clarify, totally benign. And I had to say, yeah, sorry, that you can't do that. So pretty draconian law. So just quickly to understand the interest, there's kind of three interests. There's your direct pecuniary interest, which is obvious. You own the land that's being rezoned. There's indirect, which is if you're an officer, director, shareholder of a private company that has something before council, then you got an indirect pecuniary interest. If you're a major shareholder of a public company, if you're a major shareholder of the Royal Bank, and the Royal Bank is building a new branch or wants to expand its branch in town, you have an indirect pecuniary interest. If you're a member of a body that has a pecuniary interest, so you're a member of the Chamber of Commerce, they're coming to council for some money, maybe you've got a conflict, indirect. Or if you work for somebody, if you have a business partner, if you work at the hardware store and the hardware store is coming for something pecuniary, then you've got an indirect one. And the other one that's, I could talk about all day, but I won't, your deemed pecuniary interest. So this is, it's one of these legal fictions. So the pecuniary interest of your parents, the pecuniary interest of your spouse, and the pecuniary interest of your children is deemed to be your pecuniary interest. Their direct or their indirect pecuniary interest is yours. So it's just as if you work at the hardware store, you own the land that they own. And that people get caught up. The interesting thing there, siblings aren't included. So if you can believe it, you can be on council, your brother or sister owns the land, your brother or sister is coming before council for a rezoning and you can vote away, which is just kind of crazy. And that's what happened here in Collingwood. And, we had a judicial inquiry essentially over that kind of a problem. So I think you'll see changes there. So tell your brothers and sisters, be careful. A bunch of exceptions for all kinds of very specific things. But the ones that come up more common, if you have a pecuniary interest, which is an interest in common with electors generally. So if your interest is the same as anybody else's interest in the town, then you're okay. And it can be part of the township. So an easy one is if you live on a seasonal road and there's an idea that maybe we should change all our seasonal roads to year-round maintained roads. And you think, oh my God, I live on one, I got a conflict. Well, depending. There's probably an argument that you have an interest in common with everybody else who lives on a seasonal road. Now, if there's only one seasonal road and there's only two of you who live on it, then probably you should declare a conflict. The exception wouldn't save you. But if there's a million seasonal roads and there's a million people who live on them, probably safe. So those are the kind of things it's good to call me because we can work through it together. And then the last one, sorry, this is important, an interest that's so remote or insignificant in its nature. So you think, oh, it's only like 5 cents. I'm not going to get any money out of this one way or the other. I'm not going to gain any money. I'm not going to lose any. It's just insignificant. But the second part is that it cannot reasonably be regarded as likely to influence you. So there may be something that it's quite remote, quite insignificant, your interest, but you still might be inclined to vote because it's in some other interest of yours. So this is kind of a tough one because it's not a sort of quantitative assessment. That's not enough money to make her vote that way. There's a bunch of, I have a slide there on timelines. I'll just leave that to you. Application to a judge used to be the only way you could complain about a conflict of interest was to go to a judge. They downloaded it to integrity commissioners, but they didn't give us the power to take away your seat, for example. So a judge can still do that. But a judge before, all they could do was take away your seat and some other bad things. And they thought that was too harsh. So now judges can say, you know, I'm going to give you a reprimand. Judges can dock your pay. Judges can make you pay back the money. Judges can still take away your seat. I can't do that. So when I now have to go through my analysis, and then I have to make a decision. Do I apply to a judge? So someone complains to me, Counselor X has a conflict of interest, and I look into it and I think, yeah, she does, and she voted. What am I going to do? And if I think it's not of a level that we need a judge to weigh in here because he's got, probably much, sort of better skills than I am in analyzing these things, but also the power to take away a seat, because at the end of the day, you just don't want people sitting around the council table voting on things to advance their own interests. And, I hate to say it, historically, that has happened, you can imagine. So anyways, always a question to go to a judge or not. Social media, I'm not really very fluent in social media. I think the thing to remember is, whether you're sending an email, whether you're on a soapbox, whether you're on Facebook, just be careful what you say, be respectful, don't harass anybody, just be careful. You can use it to promote yourself, to promote activities in your community. You shouldn't use it, certainly not to attack staff, to attack another member of council, to try and promote a local business, or to promote the provincial candidate in the upcoming election, none of those things. So there, I just have a few of those there, mostly taken from the city of Toronto because they have a big thing about it. So I'll stop there. If your worship, I don't know any questions on this part, and then I can just quickly do my little annual report.
I would ask if councillors have any questions, but before that, I would say that I think, as I mentioned, it is valuable information, and I think I would ask, not today, but council might consider having Mr. Elston make the same presentation after the election when there is potentially an entirely, you never know who's going to be next, and it's really valuable to have access to the expertise of an integrity commissioner. It helps us stay on the right side of it. This is a confusing and complicated process. Even trying to explain some of the conflicts can be a challenge. And this job isn't nearly as easy as many believe it to be. And the complexities lie in exactly these kinds of situations of trying to ensuring the retention of the integrity of the office and the public's trust. So I certainly appreciate you have given me some time over the last couple of years, and I appreciate that. It's been really valuable in just coloring inside the lines in a very confusing and complicated role. I think Councillor Dayu, you had your hand up.
Thank you. And good morning, Mr. Elson. It's lovely to see you.
Morning, Councillor.
I wondered if you would kindly walk us through the difference between personal versus pecuniary conflict of interest in terms of process. I don't know how many times I've gone to the MCIA trying to see how they differentiate between the two. And when you have a conflict of interest, but it isn't pecuniary in nature, what you should do. And every time I look at it, it's always referring to only pecuniary. The code of our code of conduct here at the municipality alludes to personal conflict of interest, as do the principles in the MCIA. But in neither of those two documents do I see a process. So I'll give you a brief example. Say Township of Algonquin Highlands wants to establish a new skating rink somewhere. My family is really big on skating. The new rink might go close to where I reside, or it might go 30 kilometers away. I have a personal conflict of interest. Now what do I do?
Well, thank you. And through you, Your Worship, you're right. The municipal conflict of interest is strictly pecuniary. So that's all. If you can't find a money motive or factor, that act doesn't apply. So you're back to your code. And most codes talk about, well, there's the sort of influence of your office for a private advantage, but some codes also talk about personal or private interests. So it comes up if your best friend wants to rezone her property, and she makes an application, she's in front of council. You don't have a pecuniary interest, but you've got a personal interest or a private interest because she's your friend. And to people out in the residents watching, that's maybe just as important. How is she gonna vote because that's her best friend? If somebody has an issue with it, they make a complaint to me under the code of conduct, and I just apply the code of conduct to it. And so if I find that was a personal interest, that was a private interest, shouldn't have voted, that was wrong. But it's just a code of conduct and things. So I would say in terms of the process, it's pretty much the same. I can't recall whether your code has two complaint forms, because the complaint, just technically, there are certain things under a complaint under the Conflict of Interest Act needs to be structured a bit different than a complaint under the code. So I just can't remember your protocol, whether you have Appendix A, Code of Conduct complaint, Appendix B, MCIA complaint. If you don't, I could talk with Clerk Newhook about that and see whether that's something you want to think about. But other than that, it's a complaint to me. And now some of the principles that are established, because all the cases are under the Conflict of Interest Act. So it's, if you look at those principles, it brings it closer to a pecuniary interest analysis, which I'm not sure that's helpful to you. I'm not sure that's right, but it's a distinction.
And I know, thank you for that. I think it's a really good question, Jen. That sometimes it's a moral decision, and I know I have declared a conflict where there's no pecuniary conflict, but just in a small town when decisions are being made on an abutting property or that involve friends of yours, where on a couple of times I felt it's just safer all around to just not be involved, even though there is no true conflict as the legislation is written. It's just more of a moral, small town moral, I'll step out, but please go ahead.
So Mr. Elson, would you advise that we set up some kind of form so that something, if I can see 100 miles away that I'm going to have a personal conflict like that, I am able to declare before conversations even begin on the file? Or would it be more along the lines of simply iterating at the point of the council meeting that you've got this conflict? I'm just wondering if we should err on the side of safety and have a similar process so that we don't get to the complaint section of the code of conduct,
Right.
or whether in your experience it's worked just using your human instinct.
Thanks. Through you, your worship. I think that you don't have a problem, I'll say. It doesn't crystallize until there's a matter before council. Because it's all about the decision that council is making. Is council as a whole making a decision in the public interest? And is everybody who's part of that decision making free of any bias or sort of interest? So I think it's when you see an agenda item, and whether it's a new skating rink, that you can think about it. Hopefully you'll have a couple of days notice, think it through, or call me. And that's when you have to. I think it's only when, for ease of process, when it appears on an agenda, that's when you need to make that decision. Because otherwise, I think we'll just be, shadow boxing for, on everything. And, don't come to council with that because, we love to skate and I won't be able to help you, So, yeah, I think just wait, see it on an agenda and decide, agenda by agenda is really all you can do.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Further questions from council on Mr. Elston's overview of the world that we live in? And if not, then we can just move to the our stats over the last couple of years. Your next report, which is your formal requirement under our.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, your worship. So you have my report. I actually got the date right on this piece of correspondence. So now this goes back to March 1st, 2019. So I have been terribly remiss in reporting. I get behind on things, and these reports are something that I haven't been very good at. But so just by my notes and the advice that I've got a record of, I think there were about 13 occasions in the past going on 3 years where I've given advice, and it's been just what you'd expect: conflicts of interest, questions about procedural bylaw. I did get one request for a complaint. You might remember it was the resident was concerned about a lease of his airport hangar, and it was quickly clear to me it wasn't a code of conduct thing. And I think Mr. Ewart sort of dealt with that for you. So I have a section here that I'm just going to skip about anonymous complaints and closed meetings. I'll just leave it there for if you're interested in sort of anonymous complaints, if you're interested in the rules around confidentiality and note taking in a meeting. There's a couple of things there. The second last thing I talk about are the rules about the election. And really all you need to know there is that there are sort of a cutoff point for me and for complainants and for you folks. It's basically nothing happens between nomination day, which I think is August 19th, until after the election, which I think is October 24th. So there's this just sort of hiatus that if I'm in the middle of a report, I put my pen down. If I've given it to you, you can't deal with it. After the election, there's 6 weeks where I can kind of revive a complaint. If the person who made it comes to me and says, hey, what's happening? I want that to continue. I think I have the discretion to say, you know what? I don't think so. It's no longer a valuable exercise. Maybe the person that was complained about, didn't run for re-election. So, there's some And it, you know, it's so that people don't start making complaints against political rivals, I guess. I think the other side of it, just by the by, maybe it would be better if complaints were allowed right up to the election. And if you could trust the integrity commissioner to sift through what was real and what was not, maybe people should know about what's going on. But I think they've erred on the side of they don't want this to be, you know, political. And I'm always mindful of the fact, you know, you guys didn't necessarily ask me to. You did once you had to have an integrity commissioner like everybody else. I, you know, appreciate your appointment, but I think in a lot of cases people would, you know, have struggled with the whole concept. So I think they wanted to just take it out of the fray for elections. And then finally, I just kind of maybe a little sort of sappy message I put at the end, but I know some of you know my wife is a counselor in Collingwood. And so I live and breathe this stuff. I know the pressures you're under. I know how hard you work. And I know you've got a very personal decision to make. Am I going to run again? So you know, it's just three of the things that struck me as being, you know, for you to consider. You know, the first thing is, I think, you know, now that it's a 4-year term, that's a long time. When I started 34 years ago, the term was 2 years. And then it became 3 years, and it's only fairly recently, and I forget, but that it's been 4 years. So that's a long time. So you've had 3 years of a lot of pressure, a lot of difficult issues, and not to mention it's, you know, for the last 2, it's been under a pandemic. So you haven't been able to meet in person. You haven't been able to meet with your residents. So it's been a really difficult term, I think, maybe historically one of the worst, just for all those reasons. But I think safe to say you are better counselors now. You've learned, you've thought about things. Maybe you've made mistakes. You wish you'd voted a different way or taken a different position or raised something sooner. But you know, that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So don't let the pressures and the you know, if you feel you would have done something differently if you had a second chance, you do have a second chance. So take some strength from that experience. The second thing, I know how many events, personal, family, business related, are missed. Certainly in our household, there's lots of stuff that, you know, mom, grandmother isn't there because she's got a council meeting the next day and she's locked in reading a 600-page agenda or whatever. So you're going to miss stuff. But if at the end of it you say, well, you know, yeah, I missed a couple of things for sure, but I feel really happy with the contribution I've made to my community, and that's really important to me. And I know my family understands. They're behind me. My friends are behind me. My business is fine. I'm going to carry on. And then finally, you know, this is something we talk about. If there are things that you just didn't get to, stuff that you had really hoped to accomplish that you haven't been able to, and you still want to, that's a very good reason to carry on. It's just you had things that you wanted to see done. Maybe they're halfway through. Maybe they didn't even find their way to an agenda, but you think they're important for your community. So think of it as a bit of a legacy and a reason to carry on. So forgive me, I because I'm dealing with this, you know, day in, day out, I feel sort of a connection with all of my councils and counselors, and I don't think it affects my ability to be a bit of a disciplinarian when I have to, but I certainly applaud the work that you folks do. I know how hard it is. I know all the different things you're wrestling with. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of council, for listening to me for the last hour and a quarter. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the time you've spent with us. And I think we all appreciate your final personal message, and yeah, there's definitely as you say, a certain level of fatigue setting in, and you can see it and feel it in a lot of meetings, and it's been a tough time the last couple of years. So we appreciate those thoughtful words at the end. Any further questions or thoughts from council as regard Mr. Elston's presentations today? If not, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the reports? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Barry.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Barry. Be it resolved, Council receives the Integrity Commissioner's report and presentation by Mr. Harold Elston.
All in favor? That's carried. Mr. Elston, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Your Worship. Have a great day, folks. Bye.
And you. I would ask council, it's 10:15. Would you like to stretch your legs for 10? Yes. And okay, my clock says 10:15 on the nose. So let's come back at 10:30, if that's okay. Great. We'll see you then.
Council, we are live.
Thank you for that. We are reconvened, excuse me, at item number 10, building and bylaw enforcement business. So we'll bring in Mr. Rogers. Good morning, Mr. Rogers.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
We have your December stats and rounded out the year in a very busy manner.
Yes, Mayor, and if I could make a couple comments, obviously, if you've looked at the table, you've seen that we are probably our busiest year ever on record for everything, whether it was construction value, permits issued, permit revenue. So it was an extremely busy year for us. The other thing I wanted to point out is on just above that, where it talks about there are 3 bylaw complaints investigated. Normally what's not on the report, and that's an error on my part, is we actually investigated 121 bylaw complaints this year. And of that, 110 of them have been fully resolved. So there are still a few outstanding ones, but we are obviously following up on all of those. So that's the gist of my report, unless somebody actually has a question they would like to ask me.
Any questions of David? Councillor Barry.
Just in comparison to other years, what would the average amount of complaints be? I find that your point is interesting. I'm just curious, how is it continually going up year to year?
Again, through you, Mayor, when I first started here, we were probably about 65 to 70 bylaw complaints. And almost every year we're going up by double digits. And I'm expecting, because council's been gracious enough, we're looking to hire a full-time bylaw officer, those complaints will continue to go up.
Yeah, unfortunately they will, and I think we've been very proactive in approving that position, and that's out right now. So hopefully we'll get somebody in who can undertake that. As we know, that's one of the things that we hear often from the public is, why put something in place that you don't have the ability to enforce? So hopefully having that extra person will allow us to do a little bit more work in that area. Are there any other questions of David on this report? And I don't see any hands. So David, is it looking, I mean, we're only at January 20th, but I'm assuming things are just as busy now, are they?
Again, through you, Mayor, it's off to a good start. We've got, I think we're at 7 or 8 building permits currently. So we're off to a good start.
Good. Anything further from council? May I have a mover and a seconder to receive this report? Councillor Dayu and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved, Council receives building bylaw report BLDG 122 regarding monthly activities for the month of December 2021, submitted by David Rogers, dated January 20th, 2022.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Have a great day.
Number 11 is Parks, Rec and Trails business. So we'll bring in Mr. Card.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning, Chris. We have your report here from December. Is there anything you want to highlight that rounded out the year for you?
There are a couple of small items I would like to highlight. Mainly, we're very happy to have just opened for reservations for our campsites with our new online reservation system. It's under the same service provider, but has a whole new look and functionality and some updates to the user friendliness of it, particularly for cell phones and various devices. It will also has ski passes available to be purchased online, which is very important, as right now with the Trails Office not open due to COVID, people can get their ski passes online. Of course, the ski trails are open. We just got a great dump of snow, so they're in good condition. I would also like to just highlight that I did have a meeting, a site meeting with the Bancroft and Forestry Company around some planned forestry operations that are going to be in the vicinity of some of our trails and campsites this summer. And this is over near Dan and McEwen Lake, which is across the highway from the Frost Center Trails office, of course, where our ski trails are as well. So they are going to be operating starting July 5th of next year in that area between Monday to Friday. So we have put campsite closures in place around there for visitor safety, as well as considerations around the sound of the equipment adjacent to the campsites, etc. But all campsites have buffers around them, etc. So there will be no concern around any effects on the sites themselves. Other than that, unless there's any questions through you, Mayor.
Any questions from Council? Councillor Barry, I think I saw your hand. Yes, go ahead.
Just a general observation. It seems, I don't know if it's a COVID thing or just more people looking for things to do, but I'm hearing more and more people complaining about people trespassing, looking for hiking trails. And I just wonder if we're advertising enough of the trails that are public opposed to trails that are private. I'm just seeing more and more people saying that people are trespassing on private land. And it to me, it seems strange when we do have such abundant hiking trails in the municipality and beyond. Just a thought on that.
Chris, can you respond to that?
I have also heard throughout the pandemic of more and more people getting into certainly hiking and some closer to home backcountry adventures. And this is something that I've been watching industry-wide across North America, no matter where you are, no matter where you go, at all levels of management and park systems, the same type of influx of people and relative need for communication and education has increased. We haven't changed or updated any of our strategies around marketing any of our hiking trails. They're listed on our websites. They're on a number of very high use popular formats that are online that cater to people finding trails and those types of things. It's something that I'm also seeing in not just around trails, but just in areas in general. And I'd encourage people who are looking to get into the sports or looking into new ways of recreating in this part of the province to take some time, whether it be through some course materials or some online videos that are available in many places, or a lot of various things that are available at our libraries, etc., just about educating themselves on recreating in the backcountry and what the ethics associated with that are, and what to think about when it comes to things like public areas relative to private property, etc. So to answer the question about marketing, we haven't changed anything, and I think that my hope is that this message gets out to a few people, and people are able to think about educating themselves as well.
Any other questions from council for Chris on Parks, Rec and Trails business? Seeing none, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, seconded by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved, Council receives report PRT 122 regarding monthly activities for December 2021, submitted by Chris Card and dated January 20th, 2022.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Item number 12 is Public Works business. As council knows, our department head position is vacant at the moment, and so Melissa Murray will be joining us to present the reports she's written in this department. Good morning, Melissa.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Thank you for stepping up for these reports. The first one for you is the monthly activity report from, it just seems very strange asking you about this, but that's, I like it. Monthly activities for December. Anything you want to highlight there?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just say I played really just an administrative role in putting this report together. If Council has questions about the activities as far as sort of public works and maintenance and buildings, please direct them to CAO Angie Bird. She can answer those. I'm happy to answer any questions about waste. I think like any December, always busy, catching up, changing seasons, getting ready, and it was certainly a blustery December with storms. So I think everybody was really, really busy with cleanup there. So
yeah, fair enough. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask anybody about this December report for Public Works? It's pretty comprehensive. If not, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive it? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Dayu.
By Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that Council receives Public Works report PW 122 regarding monthly activities for the month of December 2021, submitted by Melissa Murray and dated January 20th, 2022.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Next, we're back into your portfolio, which is the site services contract extension. So talk to us about that.
yes, so the contract that was newly drafted and signed in April 1st, 2019 is now at its first year of renewal. So this is just consideration of the proposal put forward by Watson General Contracting for renewal and a minor change to that contract. So Mayor and Council, I'll leave it to you for questions and comments on that.
Questions or thoughts from council on the suggested changes in the contract? Deputy Mayor Danielson. You're on mute.
My apologies. It seems reasonable. I think we've gone several times without increases from the firm, and I can see the rationale for a small number of additional hours. I don't have any issues with the request.
No, I don't either. And I think the additional hours are important considering just the changes in the community and the closure of the Hawk landfill site, and we committed to making a move toward a little more in that regard. So this is a good start there. Yeah. Anybody else? And if not, may I have a mover and a seconder to support the recommended changes and move this ahead. Councillor Shortreed and Councillor Dayu.
Shortreed, second by Councillor Dayu. Be resolved, Council receives Public Works Report PW 322 regarding site services contract extension at Township waste disposal sites submitted by Melissa Murray and dated January 20th, 2022, and that Council approves the request from Watson General Contracting to extend the contract for an additional one-year term, with additional site maintenance hours at an hourly rate of $21.73 plus applicable taxes for the period of April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023, and that Council directs staff to bring back an agreement and authorizing bylaw, and that Council approves a request from Watson General Contracting for additional site maintenance hours for the winter at Maple Lake and for the summer at Pine Springs waste disposal sites for the period of April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Your last report is the household hazardous waste events. It's great that everybody went in together, and certainly appreciate that the contracts will be handled separately, but we've got a little bit of a discussion to have on hours and money. So take us away.
Thank you, Mayor. It's hard to say whether the rate change is just because of changes in the times, or whether there was any influence by combining us together. There's really no way to break that out, and we're sort of not in a position to put the contractor in the awkward position to say, you know, what would you have done in an alternate situation. So this is the results of the RFP, and they are sort of as they are. But it is a significant increase to our program costs, which fall on top of other expected increases in materials management, and then changes to the hazardous waste program as far as producer responsibility and that sort of thing, and some of the challenges that are being seen with management of those contracts. So it's a lot on the table, and I've put some ideas on the table for discussion, just to see, you know, is this, you know, are there ideas that people would like to discuss? You know, I really put it out there for you. I'm open to any suggestions, ideas. There's not a lot that I can bring forward. So if anyone has anything, I would love to hear it.
Thank you for that. It is difficult. It is a substantial increase. And so I would look to thoughts from council about, you know, limiting the number of events that are held, or, you know, committing to the funds because we value the removal of hazardous goods from the waste stream. You could argue in either direction. So I'll just put it out to council and ask what your thoughts are on what you'd like to do around this. Councillor Barry.
Just a question on public involvement, I guess. Is there any sort of a trend on how much waste is going to each of the landfills in these events? I'm obviously a huge supporter of the event in itself, but if there's only uptake in two of the three places, I just wonder if you have any sort of figure in that.
Go ahead, Melissa.
There certainly is a correlation between the number of vehicles and the amount of materials. The materials collected at Maple and Dorset are significantly greater than those collected at Oxton. It's a bit of a difficult situation because, you know, for example, at Oxton, with only 25 vehicles, if one vehicle comes in and somebody's bought a new property and cleared out, you know, all of grandma and grandpa's, you know, 100 years worth of supplies, that's a huge spike in materials there. But are we really serving any more of the population? Not necessarily. So we want to ensure those materials are collected, absolutely. And I guess it's just a matter of, you know, how we can best do that. And like I say, anything we can do to get those materials out of our landfills is good in my eyes. And I realize, though, it can't be at, you know, there has to be some limit to cost. So that,
yeah, and this Well, this is the difficult situation is you can just look at the words on the page and say, that's a lot of money to spend for 25 people to go to one event in one place. It's not a huge community. Could it be argued that those folks could be encouraged to go to Dorset? Yes, it could. But that would be removing the only event that they have. Whereas the other two landfills, yes, they're bigger and offer or host more visitors on these days. But you could equally argue that it's just as easy for folk from Oxtongue to drive to Dorset as it is for people from the Stanhope area to drive to Dorset. So you could consolidate to the middle of the community and have a second event at Dorset and eliminate one at Maple. You can argue this different ways is my point. And that's what council has to determine is the money spent of value for the removal of these things from the stream, regardless of how many people go. If someone is just bringing a can of paint, you're right, Melissa, it's very different than if someone buys a property and clears out 100 years worth of grandma and grandpa's paint in Varsol. Very different. So back to council. I would actually, for the Oxton question, I would go to Councillor Dayu. It's your turf. What do you think about that?
Speaking of human nature in general, in no way thinking of Oxtongue Lake individually, I think a lot of stuff would go into our landfill rather than go to Dorset. And again, I think it's the path of least resistance. Oh, it's only a can, it's only a battery. It's the path of least resistance. And I think folks anywhere in the world are going to kind of come into the same mindset. Keeping our landfills as clear as possible from these sorts of hazardous waste is really, really important to me and the folks in Oxtongue I know, and to everyone on council. I believe the money is worth spending on the event at Oxtongue. I think that I, as councillor, could get more involved in promoting the event than I have in the past to see if there could be an uptick there. I note that I don't know when the Oxtongue Lake AGM is coming up next year, or even if it's been set, but it's normally around the July to August weekend, that long weekend when lots of folks are there. And if the AGM happens before, I could put in a really big pitch. And if not, there are other bonus things that could be done. We can send out specific notices via the Lake Association. There are ways, in other words. And I would like to suggest that if we kept the Oxtongue Lake event and I committed to a strong uptake in getting the news out there, that we could evaluate the outcome from this year and then make a decision for a future year. I know that there are other conversations at county level about short-term rentals, which I will not get into. The question that I would pose is, are there differences in numbers of short-term rentals around the around the township that might be influencing results too? I have no idea. I don't think we've got any of that information now anyway to be able to discuss it, but I would be I'd be concerned about removing an event entirely from the sole event entirely from the area. Doesn't matter that it's Oxtongue Lake. Just in general, I'd be concerned about removing an event if it's the only event we've got.
Yeah, and I wondered if to find the balance between sort of equitable access to the disposal service, is there any interest in having one at Maple, one at Dorset, and one at Oxtongue? That would allow an event to occur in each of our individual communities, and two events would reduce a whole bunch of the costs. I'm going to go to Councillor Shortreed and then back to Councillor Berry.
Well, now that we have a communication officer that can promote these events, maybe we'll see an increase of just having one event at each landfill is all we need.
Yeah, you could, I guess, and this is a sort of a moving mental conversation in my own head, but to Councillor Dayu's point, if you limit the number of events, the events are posed sort of spring cleanup and fall cleanup is how they generally have been positioned over the years, do you then risk the path of least resistance and have more things go away because someone doesn't want to wait 6 or 4 months to dispose of things? And I don't know. That's what we have to figure out. I'm going to go to Councillor Barry and then up to Deputy Mayor Liz.
I understand what you're saying. I guess with my initial question, I wasn't so much even meaning geography. I was also meaning in events. So for instance, there's 2 events in Maple, there's 2 events in Dorset. Is there a big difference in what is coming in? Is it busier in the spring versus the fall? I guess that's what I meant when I asked for.
Oh, right. I see. I'm sorry. I didn't quite catch that. And I know we have put Melissa on the spot. We have had the stats presented previously about the tonnage of hazardous materials that are removed at these events. Are you, she's quickly looking at her computer, I think. Are you able to speak to that at all on such short notice?
2 seconds here and
because I think both those ideas are right, that if we find where the most is occurring, and we have a communications person, we could go in that direction. We could also combine, leave it as is, spend the extra money, assess it with increased communications, and see if we increase the tonnage, and then revisit it next time. So what I'm going to do, I see the CAO's hand, but I'm going to ask Melissa if she can speak to that, unless Angie, you need to jump in because of that question to Melissa. No, okay. So
if I may, I apologize. I haven't got my actual data here and I will keep digging it out. But I can say, surprisingly, there is a lot less variability than I would expect. So even year to year, site to site, season to season, it is fairly consistent. Part of that is how our information is collected, sort of as far as the materials that we have. So there's broad groups of materials. So we're looking at the total tonnage that's collected at a time. So something that's very light, some things that are very heavy, they're offsetting each other. So that makes an average, I'm not inconsistent is sort of the concept I'm going for. I hopefully understand what I'm after there. That we just have to be careful about assumptions there, that that the amount of material isn't necessarily changing just because of the tonnage.
yeah, fair enough. I'm going to go to Liz and then back to Angie.
Yeah, one of the points that I wanted to make was similar to what you said, Mayor Moffat, about the different seasons. I think it's important that we maintain the 2 separate events because of the different seasons, because people tend to want to do a cleanup in the spring and get ready for the summer season, and same thing when they're closing the cottage up in the fall. And I also see that if you look at our building stats, there's so much more construction taking place every year that I would be reluctant for us to remove an event. I'm disappointed to see the increase in cost. When we've decided to go together, and the goal is to make it for efficiency and hopefully reduce costs, that it ends up costing quite a bit more. But I couldn't support canceling an event.
And I'm going to go to the CAO and then back to Councillor Barry.
Thank you. One of the opportunities that we have going through this process is that ratepayers will be able to go to other locations in other municipalities if they choose to. In our municipality, I think and Councillor Dayu is absolutely right, it's the path of least resistance. So I think that ratepayers in the southern portion of the township would be more apt to go to another municipality in the county than any other part of the township, just from the distance. So there might be opportunity to reduce one at Maple, even though it's a very, very busy one. Those ratepayers don't have to drive very far to go to another one. So there might be opportunity there.
Let me ask, in terms of budget, I'm going to assume then the budget increase of $10,000 has not yet been considered in budget preparations? Or is it's the report says an estimated budget increase of $10,000. Is that currently not in the budget preparations that you're going to give to us coming forward? Or is this just such new information that what do we do with it?
If I may, that would just, it's in the draft budget, yes, but obviously that would change depending on
Right, okay.
the outcome of this discussion.
All right, well, I think it's important to know if it's because staff are working on budgets as we speak. So I think that's an important aspect of that. Where am I going? Whose hands up? I was going to Councillor Barry and then to Councillor Dayu.
Just on a side, the comment about materials are accepted only from households, no materials from commercial sources, including businesses, organizations, builders, camps, charities, contractors, painting companies, places of worship, restaurants, retailers, and schools. Why not? Like if I own a restaurant and I repainted my restaurant, why wouldn't I be able to drop off hazardous waste? Just some clarity there.
Melissa?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So that is limitations of the Household Hazardous Waste Program, Hazardous Special Materials, it's called now. That is generally for all municipal waste management. There are separate categories for commercial and industrial waste compared to household. So the hauling company would require a different ECA. Essentially, commercial businesses and industries, institutions are expected to manage their own materials. So that's the way that program is. We would have significantly increased cost if we opened up, and we would, as I say, we would require a different agreement with a waste hauler if we were going to expand to the commercial sector as well. Does that give you?
Councillor Barry, did you have a redirect on that?
So conceivably that is being collected offsite, or is that being put in our landfills regardless? Like if, again, using the example of a restaurant with some painting supplies, are they going, especially a small entity, are they going to be doing that offsite, or are they going to just throw it in the landfill if they can't be part of this hazardous waste?
Melissa?
So those materials are obviously not permitted in our landfills, so they would be denied entry to the landfill if they have those materials. This is a challenging issue, and especially with small businesses, materials. It's a significant limitation of the regulations that are in place. There are very few, there's only one line, and that's between household and commercial. There's no gray area in between. There certainly is push to do that, but it's not there. As things are transitioning to producer responsibility a little more, there may be some additional options for commercial, but it's hard to say because that's up to the producers to decide. So there are now return to retail and programs like that that are hoped to come online to take some of these materials, but the bulk of materials aren't covered by any of those regulations, and they're 100% at the cost of the municipality to manage, and they're at the requirements of the ECA for the events and the contracts that we have with haulers. So this RFP was only for a household.
Councillor Dayu?
I wonder if I might ask something to the CAO, with your permission, to speak just a tiny bit more of the idea of people going to a neighboring municipality. And I almost hesitate to take that conversation further because we're working so hard on service delivery at the county level. But there is a Lake of Bays landfill site very close to Oxtongue. and I hesitate even here to bring the name of a neighboring township into the conversation that doesn't belong within the county. But would the CAO kindly just elucidate a little bit further on how it happens when people go to neighboring municipalities, if you're aware of those details?
If I may, I know what we are working on for sure, and maybe Melissa can elaborate a little bit more, but the intent was so that anyone within the county could go anywhere in the county with their hazardous waste. It just provides more opportunity. And that is done through agreement. So an agreement would need to be between Lake Bays and Algonquin Highlands, if they were agreeable to do that. But Melissa, I'm not sure, and you might be able to correct me on this, is it's my understanding that there is no requirement for an amendment to your certificate of approval or anything like that, because Buckham, it's a mobile certificate. I'm not sure the details of Lake Bay's certificates.
So just to clarify, Councillor Dayu, are you looking for the option of Dorset area folks being able to go to the Lake Bay site on Highway 35 south of Dorset?
I am not formally requesting that be explored. It's it's by virtue of our geography, the question pops into my mind. And I put it out there to share. I think that's as far as I would go. I'm absolutely committed to service delivery review here in the county and working with our municipal peers here in the county and honoring that. So I think my preference would be to find that solution inside the county, but the geography locally suggests that there is, a remote possibility out there that could eventually be explored if push came to shove, which I hope it wouldn't.
Right. And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is this is an RFP that was issued and received, and
Yes.
yeah, working with Lake of Bays. I mean, I think there's all kinds of opportunities to work with non-Haliburton County neighbors where it makes sense to do so.
Yeah.
And I think those things can be continually investigated as we grow as communities. So I think, if Melissa can just keep that in mind going forward, for the purposes of today's discussion and the report before us, it is strictly within Haliburton County. But that doesn't mean we just dismiss that idea. Wouldn't it be great if, although I had always understood that a landfill couldn't receive, maybe that's sewage lagoons, I'm not sure, but couldn't receive waste that was from outside its jurisdiction. But I'd maybe Melissa can speak to that a little bit.
If I may.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly the restrictions there are for the actual physical site, whereas our hazardous waste are events and they're offered by a mobile vendor. So those events aren't covered by the township's ECA, they're covered by the operator. So the hauler, it's their ECA. So their ECA covers whatever it covers. And they could have one that's specific to an area, but that's not likely because they are these mobile events. Agreements with other municipalities are quite common. Highlands East has an agreement with Faraday Township, and that's why you see it looks like they offer very few events. They offer quite a few events, but they're not their own events. They work in collaboration. So those are absolutely, and they're things that we've talked about many times. As you're all aware, intermunicipal agreements are challenging. And the other is, so Lake of Bays actually has a permanent, or they have permanent sites which would be covered by their site ECA and not be able to, and then they have mobile events. So there's a few more complications to throw on the table there. They are certainly things to be looked at, and they are also things that come into consideration as producers take responsibility for their own materials. They aren't bound by municipal borders. So if the paint producers of Ontario decided that they wanted to offer a paint depot, maybe that would take paint out of our equation. The caveat to that is that a lot of the materials that we cover are not included in producer responsibility regulations.
Producer responsibility just to me is just like Medusa.
Sort of producer.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's just keep in mind that those options may exist. Melissa, you're obviously very aware of them, but for the purpose of today, we've got to decide what to do with hazardous waste. And the dilemma is, increase the cost to make sure the opportunity is retained for the best diversion of these items as we can have, or limit them to one per community and hope that people don't take the path of least resistance and say, I just want this out of here today. So whose hand was just up? I think Councillor Barry and then Councillor Dayu.
I don't support the price increase, but I don't want to drop the events until maybe we have a bit more information. I think inevitably our landfills are something that, are once they're gone. And I think that trying to maintain the integrity of them and having the access for people is really important.
Councillor Dayu.
I concur and believe that because Mr. Ingram is listening, no doubt, and wondering where he's going to fall within there, I put it to the CAO if we might think about this as a specific need that could be picked up by our communications coordinator, and let's see what sort of uptick we could get across the municipality in the first year. And if it's a significant uptick, because we've really, really hit hard on comms, then that, the cost per item for the event and the cost of the item hitting our landfill, which has been removed, could more than offset the actual uptick of dollar value in the contract. That would be my preference, and then in a year's time, revisit.
Is this, Melissa, is this a 1-year contract or is it multi-year? I'm scrolling madly, but I don't see that. This is just for this year, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that what council would like to do? Is there another hand waving around up there? Is spend the extra dollars, keep an eye on it, promote it more, and see if there's a difference in increase. Because you have to remember, you're right, if the tonnage increases, then that's a win, and then we can justify sort of having, in reverse, that it was worth doing. My concern, the one part of me wants to say, let's just have one event in each place, but I am concerned that people will want to get rid of it. I'm going to the dump today, and it's going. And then we'll lose all that diversion that we have had success in for a number of years. Costs are increasing, and we've talked about this for many years. And if we want to support and maintain the integrity of the community that we've worked so hard to build, then it's, in many cases, it's going to cost more money, and that's ultimately our decision as council. So that's what I'm hearing is is stay with the 5. Grudgingly or unwillingly accept the increase, but make sure that we promote it more and track the numbers as best we can, which we do. Is that what I'm hearing? Looking for some nods or some waves or something? Melissa, did you want to speak to that?
Just, I think the other side of promotion education is let's get people not using hazardous materials. The best option for diversion is reduction. So that's where my focus tends to be.
Maybe Chad wrote that down. The best option for diversion is reduction.
So I just had to get my 2 cents in. I apologize, but thank you.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, that's a really big part not only of your employed position, but of who you are. And I think we value those those little nuggets because they remind us of what our purpose and intent is around these things. So you can say those things. Councillor Dayu.
And if I might, Madam Mayor, I'd just like to personally reiterate my commitment to getting the message out, both the reduction message and the diversion message. Yeah, it's important. It's important for all of us, and it's important for that little space in our community that tends to hold all of our waste, that is still a beautiful and important part of our ecosystem. And I put my name towards helping.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you are the ward counselor for a smaller, I think, more closer knit community. So I think you have a different kind of reach than perhaps we might in the other wards. So thank you for that commitment. That's great. Is there anything else to discuss around this? And if not, may I have a mover and a seconder to accept the report and the decision council's made? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Berry.
Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Berry. Be resolved, Council receives Public Works Report PW 422 regarding household hazardous waste collection events in 2022, submitted by Melissa Murray and dated January 20th, 2022. And the Council directs staff to schedule 5 household hazardous waste collection events in 2022 to be held as follows: Saturday, May 21st, Maple Lake Landfill, 1 to 5 p.m. Saturday, June 25th, Dorset Transfer Station, 1 to 5 p.m. Saturday, August 6th. Oxton Lake Landfill, 1 to 5 p.m. Saturday, September 10th, Dorset Transfer Station, 1 to 5 p.m. Saturday, October 8th, Maple Lake Landfill, 1 to 5 p.m. And then Council authorizes an agreement with Buckham Transport for the provision of household hazardous waste collection, transportation, and processing services in 2022. And further, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the agreement with the final form and content being to the satisfaction of the Chief Administrative Officer.
All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you for your work on this, Melissa, and for answering Council's questions today.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Next up is fire services business. So we'll bring in the fire chief. Good morning, Chief.
Morning, Mayor and Council.
A couple of reports for you. The first one is monthly activities. I think COVID's thrown a bit of a spanner in the works for training for you folks.
Definitely, Your Worship. I just want to highlight a couple things there. Excuse me. We did suspend training at the fire department as of December 20th of 2021. The purpose of that was to meet provincial requirements along with ensuring we had adequate staff if we did have fire calls. It has proved effective. There's been a couple random positive cases within members of our department, but it's never spread within the department. So I think that's a positive going forward. Where it does hinder is some of our programs. We did have first aid CPR defib research scheduled for January, so that's on hold. And we're hoping that the restrictions start to get eased because our internal ice water rescue program is dependent on ice. So it is time dependent. So hopefully the province will start to reduce restrictions on that. Along that same lines, I'm really pleased to see that our training officer, along with the assistance of Don MG, were able to get our ice water course reapproved. It did get suspended last year because of the 2 deaths that were in Ontario in the last couple of years. And so with the submissions made, they did find that we meet all requirements for the safety of putting the course on. So I think that's real positive. We are tentatively keeping our training suspended till the end of January. During that time, the training officer is working on other possibilities, Zoom training, along with online computer training. But again, hopefully our numbers will allow us. The goal I'm having is we can have 10 people in the fire hall. And once we receive that, we would like to bring it back based on the recommendation of the EOC. So other than that, it's been a pretty steady year. We're only up about 5% in calls, only 1 major fire call in that time. And again, 40% of our calls are medical.
Thank you for that overview. Thoughts, questions from council for the fire chief? No. If not, then may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the monthly activity report? Councillor Dayu and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Dayu, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved, Council receives fire services report FD 122 regarding monthly activities submitted by Michael French dated January 20th, 2022, and that council accepts with regret the retirement of Hollis Milroy, Tanner Pekarski, and Grace McEachran effective January 1st, 2022.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And the annual review of the health and safety policy.
Yes, through your worship, we do require to review the health and safety policy annually. The last one was reviewed in April 1st of 2021. We have put the policy in place to review, so it's just for council to endorse it at this time.
Any questions, comments from council? May I have a mover and a seconder to move this along? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved, council receives report FD 222 regarding the health and safety policy submitted by Michael French and dated January 20th, 2022. And further, council has reviewed the health and safety policy in accordance with section 25(2)J of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, RSO 1990, and directs a bylaw be brought forward to adopt the said policy.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Please enjoy your day.
You too. Next up is finance business. There's lots of things ringing here. Is Jeannie coming in?
Yes.
Yes, she is. Okay. Good morning, Madam Treasurer.
Good morning, everyone.
First up for you is a tax write-off, fairly straightforward.
Yes, very straightforward, just a normal under section 357 demolition raised by fire. So,
any questions? May I have a mover and a seconder to receive this report? Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Dayu.
Shortreed, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved, council received report TT 122 regarding tax write-offs submitted by Karen Mintz and dated January 20th, 2022. And the council hereby approves a noted tax write-off total under section 357 of the Municipal Act for taxes in the amount of $408.20.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Account summary. Does anybody have any questions, or did they get them answered ahead of time if they had them? Assuming the latter, may I have a mover and seconder to receive this report? Deputy Mayor Danielson, Councillor Barry.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Barry. Be it resolved that council has reviewed the expenditures incurred set out in the account summary report TT 222 in the amount of $2,651,114.38 and hereby approves payment of same.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And verbal report on the usual housekeeping of the bylaws.
yes, thank you, Mayor. It is just the to advise that the two bylaws are included in the meeting for the borrowing bylaw and then the interim taxes bylaw.
Does anybody have any questions on those? There's no resolution now. It'll be just the bylaws at the bottom end.
That's correct.
Okay, well, there's no questions, so thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That was pretty quick. It
was. Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. Planning business is next, and so we will bring in Mr. O'Callaghan. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning.
First up for you is the extension request, another extension request for the plan of subdivision there on the river.
Yes, I believe I jinxed it last year by saying this would be the last time this would be brought forward. So unfortunately, we are still working towards finalizing the conditions of this draft approved plan of subdivision. So I am actively working with the applicant, the owner of the property, in finalizing those conditions. So hopefully we will achieve that this year, but I won't attach a guarantee to it this time.
Probably a good call there. I'm glad that it's not just sitting, that there's actually active work being done on us. That's good to know. Any questions or concerns from council around this? It does seem to be the approved plan from, feels like 100 years ago. Deputy Mayor Liz, and then Councillor Dayu.
Sorry, it does feel like 100 years ago, and I'm wondering, is there a point where the rubber must hit the road with this?
Sean?
I think we are almost at that point. The ownership of the lands did change, and since then it seems to have been progressing at a swifter pace. But we are working through the fine details of the subdivision agreement, which is a rather complex document for large subdivisions such as this. But we are at the final stages of reviewing that document. So quite hopeful that development will start sooner than later.
Councillor Dayu.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With your permission, may I run through succinctly a summary of the conversation I had with Sean about this property, and then have Sean confirm my interpretation of our conversation, just for the benefit of the other members of council?
Yeah, I think it's an important piece of the puzzle for something that is as old as it is. So yeah, go ahead.
Great. So Sean and I had a conversation yesterday following a conversation that I'd had with Mayor Moffat about the environmental protection of the site and the EP areas adjacent to the site itself. There are a few spots in there that are environmentally protected, and of course, or zoned EP zones. And of course, legislation has changed a lot since the last, in the last 20 odd years. So my question to Sean was, is he confident that this application is entirely up to date with where EP legislation is at? And Sean confirmed that yes, the environmentally protected areas related to the project are consistent with all current legislation, and that the applicant has demonstrated his awareness of them. And in fact, the application either meets or exceeds the requirements pertaining to the protection of those wetland areas. Which was really excellent to hear. Sean also told me that should there be any desired changes, that would have to go through a rezoning application, which would come to council, not the Committee of Adjustment. And that Sean would certainly look at that application, but in principle is not in favor of altering a zone that is environmentally protected. So that was very helpful to hear. And then the mayor and I had also discussed site alteration bylaws. Sean, if you could confirm, you said there would be an agreement on title, which would have the same effect as a site alteration bylaw, limiting what is possible in those areas. Is that more or less, would you agree that that's what we discussed, Sean?
Yes, so the subdivision agreement will be registered on title of these properties, and part of that subdivision agreement is a environmental impact report, which I believe limits the amount of disturbance that's permitted within those EP zones, which runs along the entire water frontage of this proposed development. So essentially, yes, that would have the effect of protecting the shoreline areas on these lots.
And I appreciate that your question, Councillor Dayu, and that you talked further with Sean, and so it just popped into my head too. I should have popped into my head long before, just at the moment. There's discussions going on for the shoreline, a shoreline protection bylaw. It remains to be seen where that will land, but that's an example of something that, should it be implemented, that it would automatically or somehow be applied to this. It wouldn't be grandfathered in any way, would it?
I believe the shoreline preservation bylaw would take precedent there.
Yeah, okay.
Or is more restrictive, basically.
Yeah, and I guess that was the whole point of Councillor Dayu's question yesterday, which is sort of peeking a bit into your mind, into your world of how, as things may change, that you get to attach them to something that has such a history to it. So appreciate the clarity on that. Any questions or comments from council on this. Fingers crossed that it can move ahead. I'm not sure if we've lost Deputy Mayor Liz, but I see that her photograph's on the screen as opposed to her smiling face. There she is. I just didn't want to miss your hand in a vote. May I have a mover and a seconder to support the extension? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Shortreed.
By Deputy Mayor Danielson, seconded by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved, Council receives planning report PL 122 prepared by Sean O'Callaghan and dated January 20th, 2022 regarding draft plan of subdivision 4016910001 on lands located on part of lot 17, concession 9 and 10, geographic township of Stanhope, submitted by Greg Bishop Surveying and Consulting Limited. And further, that council recommends approval of the 1-year time extension for draft approved plan of subdivision file number 4016910001.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next up for you, Sean, is a proposed shore road allowance closing.
Yes, this is an application to close the shore road allowance in front of this property on Raven Lake. It is currently a developed piece of property. We don't have a survey yet, so it's hard to determine whether the dwelling encroaches onto that shore road allowance or not, but there does appear to be other accessory structures at the shoreline, which would certainly be on that shore road allowance. That all being said, staff are supportive of the application proceeding through the regular process to close that shore road allowance.
All right, any questions from council? May I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Dayu.
Shortreed, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that council receives report PL 222 regarding the proposed shore road allowance closing fronting property located at part of lot 1, concession 8, geographic township is Sherburne, Broadmill, Raven Lake, submitted by Sean O'Callaghan and dated January 20th, 2022. And the council approves in principle application OSRA 04421 made to stop up closing of the said shore road allowance, and that the applicants are requested to proceed in accordance with the shoreline road allowance closing procedure.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And finally, just the Committee of Adjustment minutes from December. Notwithstanding any questions, I don't see any hands, so may I have a mover and seconder to receive those? Councillor Barry and Councillor Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Barry, second by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved, council receives report PL 322 regarding the December 10th, 2021 Committee of Adjustment minutes submitted by Sean O'Callaghan dated January 20th, 2022.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
External boards, I don't know really that anybody's meeting yet, which is interesting because there's a letter from the Dorset Health Hub, but the committee doesn't appear to have met. So anyway, community safety and well-being plan. I believe there's a meeting coming up to adopt that. And I guess, Liz, you might concur that the library board news is the Dorset lockers, which we've mentioned in the past.
Yep.
So getting folks up in the Dorset area back to having unfettered access to books, which is a great thing. Is there anything about Eorn you want to tell us?
I wish that I had a great announcement to make, but I don't. So no, Eorn is just kind of keeping an eye on the work that the province is doing and looking at what other projects they can become involved in right now.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Moving to number 18, general business. We've got the AMO call to action regarding joint and several liability, and I think I will ask the CAO to speak to this. I didn't tell her I was going to ask her to speak to it, so I just kind of threw it at her.
That's okay. I did send out an email to council just with my thoughts on the call for support from AMO. It's been ongoing for at least a decade for sure. And they've put forward 7 recommendations, and certainly given the impacts that joint and several liability has had on municipalities and the rising costs of insurance, I would strongly recommend that council support this. There is one caution that I did include in my email, and it really just is a caution around reciprocals. The municipality was included in a reciprocal back in the 90s. And it didn't go well for the then that it was the Township of Stanhope at that time. And because the reciprocal operated at a deficit, we had to be reassessed, and we ended up paying an additional premium. And that was very, very expensive for many municipalities. So again, that's just a caution. There are many reciprocals out there now. And so it should be investigated, but I would strongly recommend that council support this.
Questions or comments from members of council on moving this ahead? Does everyone agrees it needs to be addressed? Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Yeah, just a comment about discussions that have taken place at the Yarn table, or sorry, Warden's Caucus table. This is something that remains very high on their priority, and they're really hoping to see all municipalities support this request.
Yeah, and let's hope that that if that support across the number of municipalities we have occurs, that something actually happens, because we've been at this for many years through many different provincial governments of varying colors. So hopefully this might be the final push. May I have a mover and a seconder to support this? Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Councillor Dayu. Whereas municipal governments provide essential services to the residents, business, and their communities, and whereas the ability to provide those services is negatively impacted by exponentially rising insurance costs, and whereas one driver of rising insurance costs is the legal principle of joint and several liability, which assigns disproportionate liability to municipalities for an incident relative to their responsibility for it. And whereas the Government of Ontario has the authority and responsibility for the legal framework of joint and several liability. And whereas the Premier of Ontario committed to review the issues in 2018 with a view to helping municipal governments manage their risks and costs. And whereas the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, on behalf of municipal governments, has provided recommendations in the source document to align municipal liability with the proportionate responsibility for incidents and capping awards. Now therefore be it resolved that the Township of Algonquin Highlands does hereby support AMO's recommendations, and further be it resolved that the Township of Algonquin Highlands is hereby called on the Attorney General of Ontario to work with municipal governments to put forward a plan of action to address joint and several liability before the end of the government's current term, so that municipalities can continue to offer high quality services to their communities.
All in favor? That's carried. I apologize. I am solo on puppy duty this morning, so he's it's just decided that it's time to stop sleeping. Next up is the correspondence from the Green Burial Society. And I guess I can speak to that. I had a telephone call from Terry Moore, who is the president. And the society had asked previously for a working group, and we weren't as advanced as we are in the decision-making process around supporting green burial. So at that time, council was not supportive of that. So Mr. Moore asked me if it was time, and I said, write a letter to council, and we will ask council again if they think it's time that we've moved the issue along enough that there's value in any work that can be done. And I think part of the challenge before was that there was a bit of a misalignment in terms of priorities and workloads for staff versus the Green Burial Society. The society has come a long way. We know that there's tremendous interest in green burials. We have committed to the section of St. Stephen's. So we're in a different place now. The challenges that we will face, I think, is that the point person, if council were to support the development of a working group, the point person for the township is the operations manager. Of course, we've already mentioned that we're currently recruiting for that position. So there's really nobody to, there's nobody for them to work with at the moment. And so I wanted to know what council, I asked Terry to send this letter in for council's discussion, wondering if it's time to reconsider a working group. My request to council would be, is there merit in having a terms of reference for any such group? Should council support it? Because we have terms of reference for every committee we have. And that would be something I'd be looking for. And I would just open it to the floor for council's discussion. Deputy Mayor Danielson.
I do think that there's value in setting up a working group. It sounds like there's some opportunities that we can take advantage of there for, well, in planning the site and in beautification of the site. I do think that there's definitely some benefits. I would also, though, support a terms of reference for the committee so that there's clarity for everyone's benefit.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts from other members of council about this? Councillor Dayu.
Thank you. Sorry, difficulties unmuting myself there. I'm also very much in favor of this. I've been following the society since its inception. They're doing great work on the public education piece, on any number of areas that have to do with making green burial more a common household idea, which is really important as we move forward as a society. So I am in favor of this. I wonder, Madam Mayor, if it's approval in principle at this stage, because we don't have that point person. But then perhaps as we wait for our ops manager to be recruited, if there is scope to reach out to the society to start having some preparatory chats, maybe talking about the kind of things that might fill up a terms of reference that the ops manager could then weigh in on when he or she is, is brought into the fold, just so that we don't lose the momentum that we now have in this conversation. I'm sure either you or the CAO would be able to say whether that's feasible. And in terms of a starting point for those terms of reference, the society has a lot of excellent ideas. We've got obviously a lot of experience on our side too. And I think the clarity, a good starting point for the clarity might be around the competitive advantage or the added advantage that each party brings. It's not competitive, but in economic sense, that's sort of the term that's used, wherein we've got the relationship with the BAO, we know what machinery we've got a lot of the nuts and bolts stuff that sort of has to remain in-house, that we would be very, very good at, that is our legislated responsibility to make decisions on, etc. And then there is all of the other areas, as the deputy mayor mentioned, like beautification or public education or the like, that maybe the society would be able to or be interested in taking a lead on. And then I'm sure there's going to be like a green, or not a green, but a gray area in between where there could be some crossover. And it's that crossover piece that I think we should wait until the ops manager is on board, before we start discussing that. The way I've been thinking about it is a bit like when you build a home, you've got engineering and you've got interior design, and the nuts and bolts of it probably have to stay with the engineering side, which is the municipality, because we do have that relationship with the BAO. We do know what equipment we've got, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the interior design piece and the public education piece, it would be great to work with folks who are so committed to this. So I am very much in favor, and I hope that maybe we could edge ourselves a little ways towards that as we wait for our ops manager to be recruited.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would ask for council's input. I think my concern is engaging in any conversation with the burial folks, and in the absence of the ops manager, who would be the point person, because that person presumably, given the kind of job operations is, that would have some very important input into that. And would we be who would have the discussion with the burial folks? And would we assign that to Dawn because she's in charge of cemeteries? She's already got a very heavy workload. So I'm just not sure who would have that conversation as is appropriate for that engineering side on behalf of the engineering aspect of the municipality. But would look to council to sort of hash that out around terms of reference. Certainly, there would need to be conversation, but the Green Burial Society isn't going to write the terms of reference and present them to us. We'd have to figure out how that works. So there's usually a township point person who prepares a draft, council reviews it, and then works with the other half, whether it's whatever the committee members are, whoever they're made up of. So, make that work, I guess. Looking for thoughts from council on that. What would you like to do, Councillor Berry?
I support the passion and the initiative. I think there's a lot of moving parts right now, just in regards to not having a public works manager, and also our committee's not meeting in person right now. So I think we sort of need to have those two things in place. But that being said, I do think it would be nice if council could sort of, put a bit of a timeline in place of how we're going to proceed and what are the next steps, maybe just in regards to, is this something that we could see potentially in place for this coming winter opposed to this winter? But I'm not sure who to direct that to, but those are just my thoughts.
I guess I would ask the CAO, the staff I'll report to you, whose head is exploding and who's maybe got some space in their world. What are your thoughts on how to move this conversation forward?
I think it has to live with the operations manager. And I really do believe we're still probably at least a couple of months out from having someone on board and then them becoming familiar. We're probably at least 3 or 4 months out from any kind of conversation. Dawn, it really can't live with Dawn. She can help in the background, but it shouldn't live with her. So I really do think we need to wait for the operations manager. So I'd like to be optimistic for this coming winter, but that's really all I could say at this point.
Yeah, and there's so much going on, and I feel a bit like this is one of the projects that are particularly slow, but I fully understand the reasons why it is, and I respect that everybody's busy. Certainly, the idea of working with the college for the timber framing program is not new. I know that Mr. Moore had presented that a couple of years ago, and the challenge there is we can't commit to working with the college. I think it's a great idea. I think we loved the idea the first time we heard it. We can't commit to working with the college to build a structure when we don't have the person in place to figure out what vehicles need or are required to go through it with what's, spatial considerations and et cetera. So the timber framing idea might be for next summer, because it's summer program for the summer college program. Other members of council, Liz or Julie, what are your thoughts based on what Angie said? We know that it lives with the ops manager and we just don't have that person. So aside from, first of all, I want to know, does council agree that we're going to set up this working group? Yes, no? Yes, I'm seeing nods. Okay. So then, given the challenges that we have with our staff complement at the moment, what's your idea for timeline? Is what I'm looking for. You've heard the CAO about staff, and I think we're all well aware of how busy things are. Deputy Mayor Liz, and then Councillor Shortreed.
It's unfortunate the way the timing has been with this particular project. With changeover of our public works director, it really has kind of put a bit of a kink into it. But I don't think that we really can do anything without that person in place and them being the point person. I would see other people being involved in the committee per se, but we couldn't proceed without that person in place. So, another delay is unfortunate. I would just say that, at the earliest possible opportunity that that we can go forward. If there's someone who could work on a bit of a terms of reference for the committee, that'd be great. But I mean, that's Angie's decision.
Yeah, and certainly to a couple of the points that are in Mr. Moore's letter, the idea of taking stock of community support. I think we're well past that. We know there's lots of community support. In fact, I think if we opened a green burial section tomorrow, it would be filled up very quickly with reservations. I'm not sure if you're supposed to call them reservations. And we've already expressed that we're keen about the timber frame project, and we know that that the opportunity to promote it is there, but I don't think there's not going to be much of an effort there because it is already well thought of. And so I don't know at the moment that there's much the society needs to do that we don't already know, given our existing commitment to the green section. So the things they can offer there's still opportunity for the things they can offer when and if that time, not if, what time comes when there's a person on board. Councillor Shortreed, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree for waiting for the public works. I think starting instead of stepping into something that's already started will be a lot easier. And it's just something else somebody else's plate doesn't have room for.
Yeah, I mean, we have a template for committee terms of reference, so it shouldn't be too hard or time consuming to populate that when the time comes. Councillor Barry, did you have your hand back up?
I was just going to say, I support moving forward with the terms of reference. That's a bit of, something we could start on.
But who's going to do them? That would be the job of the operations manager. It's not our job to write terms of reference.
But we would be the
governing. We would approve them. Yeah. So I'm hearing support for waiting for the ops manager. Is that what I'm hearing? I see one nod. Nod. It's unfortunate, but I think the work of the society is done. They've made the presentations, we've made the commitment, we're moving it ahead. We just have this unfortunate timing gap with point person in our staffing complement. But the good news is we've moved this ahead, and I think it'll be beneficial for sure. Councillor Dayu, you're thinking about saying something, but you're not sure.
Well, I am thinking about it because it gets into the weeds a little bit, which is not my role. I guess I'll say it now anyway, now that I've piqued everyone's interest. I'm wondering if we could say in the resolution something about we approve in principle, we shall wait until the ops manager is in place, and we commit to making first contact, say within the first quarter, to set a timeline for moving ahead, just so that we don't risk having it trail, because there is that risk. There is a risk that it would just trail, and it wouldn't come back up. I look to you and I look to the CAO to see if that is a reasonable point to put into a resolution.
And I would defer to the CAO because she's the one that deals with new employees starting and what size of the file is that she gives them. So I would defer to Angie on that.
I mean, council knows how large a portfolio the operations manager has. By doing that, by putting that in the resolution, you are setting my priority for the operations manager. So certainly council can do that. But there are a lot of projects for that person to catch up on and, get underway. So that's council's direction.
Back to you, Councillor Dayu.
Yes, thank you. In light of that, I think I retract that idea. I would like to keep it in the hands of the CAO to make that.
I mean, we're making the commitment. I think the challenge we have with the currently vacant position, that is also the point person for this, is fully understandable and it's reasonable. But the commitment has been made. I'm hearing the commitment, and we'll follow it through as soon as is possible. That's one of the things that is the CAO's job, to make sure that that person, when they come in, knows that this is something that's in there somewhere. But I don't mean in there somewhere as in It doesn't matter where, but it's on the list. We will have a resolution to that effect. Is there anything further to talk about on this, moving this forward? May I have a mover and a seconder to do so? Deputy Mayor Danielson and Councillor Dayu.
Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved, Council receives correspondence from Terry Moore, President of the Haliburton Highland Green Burial Society, requesting an ad hoc committee be created to assist with the design of green burial section and discussions regarding winter burials. And the council approves in principle the creation of an ad hoc committee upon the hiring of an operations manager.
All in favor? That was very slowly carried. Liz, did you, never mind, the vote has been cast. That's carried. Thank you. Next item is correspondence from Corey McCaig from the county's climate change coordinator regarding the climate change action plan advisory group. We talked about this at the county and we are going to talk about a representative from the local municipality. And I believe that Councillor Dayu has expressed interest in filling this role, and she's nodding vigorously. Is that, Liz, would that sum up sort of the county's direction on this? Is the looking for a county appointed person or a council appointed person at the lower tier?
That's right.
Is anybody else interested? Are we going to run a little election for this position, or is Councillor Dayu going to be acclaimed as the municipality's appointee? By gosh and golly, you're appointed. That's terrific. Thank you for stepping up. I know this is something that's of interest to you, and I know you'll represent us well there. It's a big job. It's going to be good.
Thank you.
May I have a mover and a seconder to appoint Councillor Dayu to this committee? Councillor Shortreed and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Shortreed, seconded by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be resolved that council receives correspondence from Corey McCaig, Climate Change Coordinator, requesting appointment of a township representative for the Community Climate Action Plan Advisory Group, and that council hereby appoints Councillor Dayu to the advisory group.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Finally, we have our annual correspondence from, it's not finally, but in this section, correspondence from the Dorset Health Hub regarding their annual budget consideration of $10,000. There's a letter that's attached. Traditionally, we defer to budget, accept the letter, defer it to budget, and have our conversation at that time. Is that acceptable to council? May I have a mover and a seconder to do exactly that? Councillor Shortreed and Councillor Dayu.
By Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that council receives correspondence from Ruth Ross and Colin Rennie requesting a contribution to the Dorset Health Hub, and further the request be referred to the 2022 budget deliberations.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Correspondence, I don't think anything was moved.
No.
So may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the correspondence listing? Councillor Shortreed and Councillor Barry.
Shortreed, second by Councillor Barry. Be it resolved that council receives the January 20th, 2022 correspondence listing for information.
All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. With an eye to the time, it's just before noon and we are going into closed session next. So shall we break for lunch and then go into closed after lunch? Or Madam Clerk, would you like us to go into closed now and then break, or go into closed after lunch?
We could proceed with the motion after lunch to proceed into closed.
Okay, so would council like half an hour or 45 minutes, or what do you think is doable today? Anybody? Liz?
45 minutes, please.
I thank you for that. I'm just looking, we have quite an extensive closed session, so let's have a rest and eat our Wheaties and come on back for that. So we'll see council back here at 12:45. Thank you, everyone.
We're live, council.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We are reconvened. May I have a mover and a seconder to go into closed session? Councillor Dayou and Deputy Mayor Danielson.
Moved by Councillor Dayou, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved that council adjourn its open session at 12:47 p.m. to proceed into closed session to discuss matters pursuant to section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001 SO 2001 as amended pertaining to 1. Section 239(2)A, security of municipal property, security at Lake Landfill. 2, section 239(2)B and E, personal matters about identifiable individual and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals, zoning compliance matter. 3, section 239(2)B and E, personal matters about identifiable individuals and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals. Township property matter. 4, section 239(2)B and E, personal matters about identifiable individual and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals. 5, section 239(2)D, labor relations or employee negotiation, staff position wages. 6, section 239(2)D and B of labor relations or employee negotiations and personal matters about identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, CBO position recruitment.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Or we're not, oh, there we are. We have to, do we want us to turn off our cameras and stuff? Or are we?
Yes, please. Council, we are live.
Thank you for that. May I have a mover and a seconder to resume the open session of council? Deputy Mayor Danielson, Councillor Barry.
By Deputy Mayor Danielson, second by Councillor Barry. Be it resolved that council adjourns closed session at 4:05 p.m. and open session resumed.
All in favor? That's carried. May I have a mover and a seconder to authorize enhanced security measures at landfills? Councillor Short-Reed, Councillor Barry.
Moved by Councillor Short-Reed, second by Councillor Barry. Be it resolved that council set aside its video surveillance policy and direct staff to proceed with implementation of enhanced security measures at landfill site.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive the bylaws? Councillor Barry, Councillor Dayou.
By Councillor Barry, second by Councillor Dayou. Be it resolved that the following bylaws be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed. 2022-1 to authorize the borrowing of money. 2022-2 to provide for the interim tax levy and to provide for interest and penalty to be applied on taxes. 2022-3 to stop up closing of a part of the original shore road allowance fronting in front of lot 5, concession 4, geographic township of Stanhope, Cushaw Lake Ford. 2022-4 to govern the proceedings of council, procedural bylaw. 2022-5 to adopt a health and safety policy.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw? Councillor Short-Reed, Deputy Mayor Danielson.
By Councillor Short-Reed, second by Deputy Mayor Danielson. Be it resolved that bylaw 2022-6, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council, be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed.
All in favor? It's Carried, thank you. And may I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn today's very long and fruitful meeting. Councillor Shortreed, Councillor Dayu.
By Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Dayu. Be it resolved that the January 20th, 2022 regular council meeting is hereby adjourned at 4:07 PM.
All in favor? It's carried, thank you. Very long day. Thank you very much to all involved, and we'll see you next time. Councillor Barry, we are adjourned, but did you have something you wanted to say?
Just a question about the health and safety. Do we have to come in and sign that? Do we need an official signature on that?
Madam Clerk, is that one of the policies that all members of council are required to sign?
Yes, the bylaws approved it, so when council's able to come in and sign later, we can get it signed, but it has been approved by council by bylaw. So it's
okay. Full force and effect. Great. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice evening.
You too.